I know you were mentioning to me before your testimony a bit about how you grew up.
Yeah.
So God's walked you through a lot as well. So
just in the area, I mean, as I was growing up, there's different stuff you could, I guess I never went to a doctor to get it diagnosed, but looking at diagnoses now, looking back at some of the stuff I struggled with, there was schizophrenic type of stuff. And I think along sort of the whole conglomerate, probably depression, whatever else. They might have given me a couple of titles, I don't know. But it was stuff that I struggled with growing up, and it was, man, there's nothing, people who don't go through it don't understand what it's like to have a battle within you. And it's one thing to have pressure of bills or something like that that's outside of you putting pressure on your mind. But when you literally feel like you have no control over your own mind, it's scary. And it's hard, and I've been through it, and it was my parents walked with me through it, and we really took it on the level. I don't understand all the technicalities. I understand a lot of stuff has to do with chemical balance, but the interesting thing to me, I was just talking with my dad about it again today, was just the. There's a scripture in the Bible that talks about a person without self-control is like a city without walls. And if you look at self-control or just our mind as having walls, when it feels like you can't stop thoughts from coming in and out of your mind, it feels like you have no walls, you have no protection. You feel like you can just be raided by, if you think of one of those old movies where they laid siege to a city, it feels like you have no walls, like Lord of the Rings type of thing, where they were trying to break down the wall, and it feels like you forget about breaking down the wall. It feels like any old thought can come to your mind and go out. And went through a process. It's interesting though, with that a lot of the thoughts that come to your mind in those situations, they're not. That's one thing that I always found peculiar, where they try and just put it into medical terms and take the spiritual completely out of it, because you don't get random thoughts come to your mind of, I just can't stop thinking about fuzzy bears and beautiful weddings and all kinds of nice stuff. It's all this weird stuff that comes to your mind. All this, really, a lot of times it's really dark stuff. And at least that was my experience, and from what I've heard and seen, that's the experience of a lot of people who have these issues. And that leads me, in my experience, to believe that there's definitely a demonic aspect to a lot of that stuff, and tracing right back. And even just looking on this level, where like Krista was saying before, the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And we don't necessarily know in our lives, well, how come he had access or this or that. And sometimes it might trace back to, a family line thing or something from our past. I know my dad's dad was committed suicide and was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and maybe there's a generational tie in there somewhere or whatever. All I knew was that this is what I was facing. And so we really purposed to, we addressed a lot of it on a spiritual level. I'm not recommending that it's all addressed on a spiritual level. There's definitely a huge place for dealing with it on a medical level and getting help and counseling, all those different things. And I highly recommend that. But it's one of those things where sometimes we look at what we've been through and we say, God, where were you? And where are you? And sometimes you can't see in the midst of it. And I don't know if you ever heard that Footprints poem, where sometimes it feels like it's the story of a person who's walking through life, and they saw two sets of footprints in the sand, and it was like when God was walking with them. And then they'd find areas in their life where they only saw one set of footprints, and they go, God, where were you? Those are the hard times, and where were you in that season? And God was saying, you didn't realize it, but that one set of footprints wasn't just yours and I left you, but it was actually me carrying you. And sometimes it doesn't feel like that, I understand. Sometimes it feels like God's far away. But the truth of the matter is, even when we can't feel him, he's still there. And the truth also is that a lot of the things we go through in life, we say, well, God, you should have stopped it, or why didn't you stop it? And there's times and places where God doesn't necessarily have the full access to stop the situation. That's where you even look in prayer, when God said, pray that my kingdom come, my will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, that if he's asking us to pray that, that is to say that in certain places and certain times, his will isn't being accomplished on earth. And that prayer has something to do with that. And not necessarily only our prayers, but it's one of those things to understand that God's not necessarily down here pawning us around and say, oh, I think it would be good for them to go through this right now. And I think, oh, and he doesn't use death, and he doesn't use mental illness as his tools. I heard someone describe it this way one time. A good father doesn't send his child down the street to the child molester to help him teach his child lessons. That's not how God operates. And it's really important to, even when we don't understand everything, to understand that those things aren't God's will. They're not his will for us in the sense of he's not using those bad things. And that's not his desire for us. And that to me, in my situation, when I understood that God didn't desire that for me, it gave me a hope that even though I'm going through this right now, I don't even understand exactly why I'm going through this, but even though I'm going through it, I understand that this is not God's will for me. And therefore there's a hope that if I reach out to God, and I might have to go through a hard season, but if I reach out to God, that he's going to do just like Jesus said in that scripture. He anointed Jesus, and there's a power made available to set at right my mind. And that's what's happened over a period of time, where I started to understand the scripture in certain areas and started to build. I started to apply and to see the power of God released in my situation. And over time, it completely transformed me, where I used to, I used to be in torment 24/7 sometimes. And it was like, I feel like I couldn't even talk to God. And I was going through all this crazy stuff in my mind, but I started to apply some of the principles that the Bible talks about God's freedom. And little by little, I started to see my mind get stronger. I started to see freedom come. And that, I believe so strongly, and I really know just through experience that that's God's will for you. And when you understand that, there's a hope that can come. You say, okay, God, I know that, God, you are a good God. And in that, you can actually, you don't feel like, because if it's God's will, how can you fight God's will? He's God. If you think, if it's his will, then it puts us in a situation where you can't necessarily fight God, but when you understand it's not his will, now there's hope that the situation can and will change.